The suitcase hit the wet front lawn so hard it burst open. My clothes spilled into the muddy grass like they were nothing. Like I was nothing. I stood frozen on the porch while my mother screamed words I never thought I would hear from her mouth. Get out of my house. I raised a liar and a thief. My father stood 2 feet behind her.
He wouldn't look at me.
Not once. My younger sister Brianna clung to her fiancé Mason's arm like she was about to faint, fake tears streaming down her face. She whispered something to him, shaking her head slowly.
Performing.
The neighbors across the street had stopped walking their dog. A relative who had come to drop something off stood by the gate with her mouth open. I couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold my phone. I kept thinking someone would stop this. Someone would say, "Wait, let her speak." Nobody did. My mother stepped back inside and slammed the door so hard the frame shook. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I looked down at the mud. A photograph had fallen from the open suitcase. A family picture. Brianna was smiling in the center. I picked it up and whispered, "You have no idea what she's done." My name is Naomi Carter. I was 27 years old the morning my parents threw me out. I want to explain what happened from the beginning, so you understand how a family that once loved you can be turned against you so completely. Brianna is 3 years younger than me. Growing up, she was the one everyone looked at. Pretty, bubbly, emotional in a way that made adults want to protect her. If she cried, the room changed. If she smiled, everyone relaxed. I was different. I was the quiet one, the dependable one. The daughter who paid the overdue electricity bill without telling anyone. The one who showed up when the car broke down, when dad needed someone to handle paperwork, when mom needed an extra set of hands without asking twice. I never minded. I told myself that was what family meant. You showed up. You gave without counting. I thought that was enough. I thought they saw it, even if they never said so out loud.
I was wrong about that.
I had been wrong about it for years. But I didn't know that yet. Not fully. The trouble started 6 months before the morning I stood in the mud watching my clothes soak through. It started the night Brianna announced her engagement, and I noticed something in her eyes that didn't match her smile. The engagement announcement was a Tuesday night dinner. Mom had cooked her good dishes. Dad had opened a bottle of wine he'd been saving. When Mason got down on one knee in the living room, everyone screamed and cried happy tears. I hugged Brianna. I meant it. Mason was polished and kind in the way people are when they're trying to make a good impression. He had a steady job, a warm handshake, and he looked at Brianna like she was the most important person in the room. I had no reason to dislike him. And I didn't. What I noticed wasn't about Mason. It was about Brianna. Halfway through dinner, when everyone was laughing and passing food around the table, Brianna's phone buzzed under the table. She glanced at it, and something crossed her face. Not joy. Not excitement.
Panic.
She pressed the phone face down against her thigh and smiled again immediately, but the smile didn't reach her eyes this time. Nobody else saw it. I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. 2 days later, I was helping Mom reorganize some paperwork on the kitchen counter. Bills, insurance forms, receipts. I saw the corner of a bank statement peeking out from under a folder. The balance was wrong. Very wrong. There was a large withdrawal I didn't recognize. Mom noticed me looking and snatched it away. "Don't worry about things that aren't your business, Naomi." I nodded, but I remembered the number. 3 weeks after the engagement announcement, Brianna hosted a brunch at a restaurant downtown to celebrate with close family and a few friends. Mom wore her good earrings. Everyone brought cards and little gifts. I sat across from Brianna most of the morning and she seemed fine. Laughing, opening envelopes, showing people photos of wedding inspiration on her phone. Then something shifted. Brianna went quiet during the middle of the meal. She excused herself to the bathroom and came back with red eyes. Mom immediately asked what was wrong. Brianna said nothing at first. Then she looked at me across the table. "I just need a minute," she said softly. It's hard to be happy when someone's been texting your fiancé behind your back. The table went completely still. Every head turned toward me. I felt my face go cold. "What?" I said. Brianna didn't answer me. She turned to Mason and touched his hand gently. You don't have to protect her. Mason looked uncomfortable but said nothing. He stared at his plate. Mom reached across and took Brianna's hand. Dad looked at me with something I'd never seen on his face before. Disappointment. Hard and fast, like he'd already made up his mind. I tried to speak. That's not true. I haven't texted Mason. I don't even have his number. Nobody responded. That was the first time the room chose her without asking for my side. The drive home from the brunch was the longest ride of my life. I sat in the back seat while my parents talked quietly in the front like I wasn't there. When we got to the house, Dad said, "For once, Naomi, stop competing with your sister." I stood in the hallway and just stared at him. Competing. That was the word he chose. I wasn't competing. I was being accused of something I didn't do, and no one had asked me a single question. I went to my room and sat on the edge of my bed trying to steady my breathing. Around midnight, my phone lit up. A text from Brianna. I stared at it for a long time before I opened it. Stay quiet like always. That was the whole message. 4 words. But they told me everything. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't Brianna being hurt and lashing out. She had planned that moment at the brunch. She had chosen her words, chosen her timing, and watched the room shift against me. She knew exactly what she was doing. I sat with my phone in my hand and thought back over the last few months. The strange coldness that had started between us. The way she had stopped calling me for small things the way she used to. It all traced back to one specific conversation. One moment 6 months earlier when she had asked me for something and I had said no. 6 months before the engagement party, Brianna had called me late on a Wednesday evening. She sounded different from the start. Tighter. She didn't ease into the conversation the way she usually did. She asked if I could lend her money.
Not a small amount.
A large one. She called it a temporary emergency loan, but she wouldn't tell me what it was for. Just that she needed it urgently, and that I couldn't tell Mom and Dad. I asked her what was wrong. She got vague. Said she owed someone and that it was complicated. I pushed gently. She got defensive. I told her I couldn't lend that amount to someone who wouldn't explain why they needed it, even if that someone was my sister. I wasn't being cruel. I genuinely didn't have that kind of money sitting around doing nothing. And something about the call felt off. She hung up quickly after that. Didn't say goodbye properly. Over the next few weeks, I noticed she started pulling away from me. Short responses to texts. Skipping calls she would normally take. She wasn't angry in a loud way. She was cold. Deliberate. Like she had made a quiet decision about me. I told myself it would pass. That she was stressed about something and just needed space. But after the brunch, I understood. I hadn't just refused her help. I had made myself an obstacle. And Brianna had decided what to do with obstacles. 2 weeks after the brunch, my mother called me at work. I stepped out of a meeting to answer because she almost never called during the day. Her voice was tight. "There's money missing from the emergency medical fund," she said. "Your father and I want to talk to you about how you had access to the account details." I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles went white. The emergency medical fund was an account my parents had set up years ago after Dad had a health scare. It was meant for hospital bills and serious situations. Only family members knew it existed. I had helped set it up. I knew the bank name. That was it. I did not have the account number. I did not have login details. I had never transferred money out of it. I had never even considered it. I told my mother all of this. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Brianna said you asked her about the account a few months ago. That you seemed very interested in it." That was a lie. A clean, specific lie. The kind that sounds believable because it has a detail in it. I had never asked Brianna anything about that account. But someone had been in it. And whoever that person was had made sure the trail pointed at me. I told my mother I would come home that evening to explain everything. She said, "That would probably be a good idea." I showed up at my parents' house that Thursday evening expecting a private conversation. What I walked into was something else entirely. The living room was full.
Mom. Dad.
Brianna. Mason. My Aunt Fola. 2 of Dad's cousins who didn't even live nearby. It felt arranged. Everyone was sitting like they'd been there for a while. Brianna had clearly been crying recently. Her eyes were puffy in that way that looks more practiced than I used to notice. Mom gestured to a chair in the middle of the room. The family meeting chair. I sat down. Then Brianna started talking. She didn't raise her voice. That was the thing that made it worse. She spoke calmly, sadly, like someone giving a report. She talked about how I had been spiraling since she got engaged. How I was bitter about her happiness. How I had been trying to quietly pull her relationship apart and steal from the family out of jealousy. She said it all without looking at me once. I tried to speak. My mother cut me off. Let her finish, Naomi. When Brianna was done, I tried again. None of that is true. Mom looked at me and said, "Stop being manipulative." That word landed like something physical. I looked around the room for one face that showed doubt. I found none. The meeting was not about finding truth. It had already decided what the truth was. I didn't argue after that. I had learned in that living room that argument was useless. There was nothing I could say into a room that had already made its decision. So, I went quiet. I drove home, packed a bag, and that was how I ended up standing on the porch the next morning when everything fell apart. After my mother screamed at me and the door slammed, I sat in my car for a long time. I didn't cry right away. I was too numb for that. I kept running through everything in my head, looking for the moment I should have seen coming. The list was long. I had 3 people I could call. A coworker who was more of an acquaintance, a cousin I wasn't close with, and Ava. Ava had been my best friend since the 2nd year of university. She answered on the 2nd ring. I didn't have to explain much. She said, "Come now." By the time I pulled up to her apartment, it was raining. She met me at the door and took the suitcase out of my hands. I had managed to grab most of my clothes before the door was slammed. Not everything, just what fit. I sat on Ava's couch with a cup of tea I couldn't drink and tried to figure out what came next. I had nothing figured out yet, but I had one person who believed me, and that night it was enough. Sleeping on Ava's couch was harder than I expected. Not because the couch was uncomfortable, though it wasn't great, but because my brain wouldn't stop. Every night, I replayed the accusations. Every morning I woke up and had to remind myself where I was and why. Ava gave me space and quiet without making me feel like a burden.
She didn't push me to talk.
She just made sure I ate. On the 3rd night, around 2 in the morning, I almost called my mother. I had the phone in my hand and everything. I wanted to apologize just to stop the silence. I wanted my family back even if it meant pretending. I put the phone face down on the cushion and made myself breathe. I knew that if I called and begged, nothing would change. Brianna would still have what she wanted. The story would still be the one she had told. And I would have given up the only thing I still had, which was the truth. That same night, a notification buzzed on my phone. The family group chat, the one with my parents, Brianna, and a few aunts and cousins, had been updated. I had been removed. I stared at the screen. Even the group chat. She had thought of everything. I put the phone on the coffee table and stared at the ceiling until it was morning. Something was shifting inside me. I wasn't numb anymore. I started going through my things more carefully once I had calmed down enough to think clearly. I had grabbed most of my folders when I packed, a habit from years of keeping records for my parents because nobody else in the family bothered. Inside one of those folders, I found something I had forgotten about. A collection of payment receipts, electricity bills, water, the internet provider, insurance premiums, going back almost 2 years. All paid from my personal account, all with my name on the transfer records. Not one of those payments had ever been discussed. My parents didn't know I had paid them. Or maybe they did know and had never said anything. Either way, the documentation was there. Quiet, clean, time-stamped. I spread the papers across Ava's kitchen table and looked at them for a long time. I wasn't looking at them as proof yet. I was just looking at them as the story of who I had been to that family for 2 years. I had kept the lights on. I had kept the internet running during the months when Dad's business was slow and Mom was between jobs. I had done it without asking for anything back, without even mentioning it, because I thought that was love. I thought love was the thing you did when nobody was watching. Looking at those receipts, I understood that I had been wrong. Invisible generosity doesn't protect you. It just leaves you with no witnesses. Once I started looking, I couldn't stop. I went through every bank transfer I had made over the past 3 years. It took 2 full evenings on Ava's kitchen table, but the picture that came together was clear and painful. There were small transfers to Brianna going back almost 30 months. 20 here, 50 there. Always framed as temporary. Always with a message like, just until payday, or I'll get you back next week. I had never asked for any of it back because she was my sister. Then the amounts got larger. A few hundred, then more. I could trace the pattern like a line on a graph, quiet, and then suddenly steep. But the family accounts were a different story. I didn't have access to those statements. I only had what I had seen accidentally in the kitchen. But I knew someone who might. My Aunt Fola, my mother's older sister, had always had a closer relationship with Mom than anyone else in the family. She was the one who helped manage the household during Dad's health scare. She knew where things were kept. She had been in that living room the night of the staged meeting, but she was the only one who hadn't looked at me with certainty. She had looked at me with something more like discomfort, like a woman who wasn't sure. I filed that away. I wasn't ready to act yet, but I was paying attention. The call came on a Tuesday morning, 9 days after I had moved onto Ava's couch. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered because I had been answering all numbers. You don't know where information comes from until it arrives. Naomi. The voice was careful, a little nervous. This is Mason. I sat up straight. Mason was the last person I expected to hear from. He asked if we could meet privately, not at the family house. Somewhere neutral. He sounded like a man carrying something heavy that he wasn't sure he should put down. I asked him what this was about. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I think you were telling the truth. We met that afternoon at a coffee shop on the other side of town. Mason arrived before me and sat in the back corner. He looked tired. He had dark circles under his eyes, and he gripped his coffee cup like it might float away. I sat across from him and waited. I didn't want to rush him. He needed to say it in his own time, or he wouldn't say it at all. He looked at the table first, then at me. Brianna told me you had been messaging me. That's what she said in front of the family. He paused. That was the first thing she said that I knew for certain wasn't true. I didn't speak. Because you'd never had my number, he continued. And I never had yours. Mason told me everything slowly. He was choosing his words carefully, like a person who had been holding something in for too long and didn't want to spill it messily. He said Brianna had been under pressure for months before the engagement. Financial pressure, specifically. He didn't know the full extent of it at first. She kept things compartmentalized. But small things had been adding up. She was tense in a way she hid from her family, but couldn't fully hide from him. Then, about 3 months before the engagement dinner, he had overheard her on a phone call. He wasn't trying to listen. He was in the kitchen getting water. She was in the hallway and didn't hear him come in. She was speaking quickly, in a low voice, to someone he couldn't identify. He only caught a few sentences clearly. One of them stopped him cold. Naomi can survive it. She always does. She has a job, and no one who depends on her. It'll fall on her, and she'll figure it out. She always figures it out. Mason had pulled out his phone in that moment, almost automatically, and recorded about 40 seconds of it. He wasn't even sure why at the time. He said it felt like something he might need later. He slid his phone across the table to me. I pressed play. I heard my sister's voice.
Clear and calm.
Planning. Using my survival as a reason to make me her scapegoat. After my meeting with Mason, I went back to Ava's apartment and sat at the kitchen table for a long time without speaking. Ava made dinner. She set a plate in front of me. I ate without tasting anything. I was doing math in my head. Not just the numbers. The scale of what Brianna had done. The missing money from the family's emergency medical fund was not a single withdrawal, the one I had glimpsed on the statement in the kitchen. When Mason quietly shared what little he knew about the financial situation, the picture became much worse. There hadn't been one unauthorized transfer. There had been multiple, over a period of at least 14 months. And it didn't stop at the emergency medical fund. Some of the transfers had come from their father's business account. a separate account that was meant for business expenses and supplier payments. Dad was self-employed. That account was not large. Every dollar that came out of it had somewhere it was supposed to go. I didn't have the statements. I didn't have the exact figures. But I had enough to understand that what Brianna had done was not a moment of desperation. It was a sustained, careful series of decisions. And she had been afraid that if anyone looked closely, they would find her. So she made sure they looked at me instead. I needed to understand the full picture before I could do anything with it. That meant tracing where the money had actually gone. I couldn't access my parents' bank accounts, but I didn't need to. I had my own transfer history, which showed every time Brianna had taken money from me. And I had Mason, who had quietly pulled together the statements Brianna had left visible on her shared laptop before she got more careful. I cross-referenced everything I had. The transfers from my account to Brianna's lined up with dates when she had also been making purchases. Designer bags from an online store. 3 hotel bookings for long weekends, none of which I had ever been invited to. A travel deposit for a trip that Mason said she told him was paid for by a gift. There was also a credit card. Not one Mason knew about. An account in Brianna's name with a balance that explained the desperation behind that phone call 6 months ago when she had begged me for money. She hadn't been in general financial trouble. She had been trying to cover a specific debt. A secret one. And when I refused, she couldn't cover it quietly anymore. I printed everything I had. I organized it into a folder. Oldest date first, most recent last. I wrote nothing on the outside of the folder. I didn't label it. I just held it and thought about what I was going to do with it. I asked my mother to meet me at the park near our old house. Neutral ground. She agreed, which surprised me. I got there first and sat on a bench near the fountain. She arrived 5 minutes later looking older than I remembered her looking just weeks ago. She sat beside me, and we were quiet for a moment. I opened the folder and placed 3 documents on the bench between us. The utility payment receipts with my name on them. A bank statement showing a large transfer from me to Brianna's account labeled Urgent Please. And a printout of 2 messages Brianna had sent me asking for money, both marked, "Please don't tell Mom." I spoke calmly. I told her I wasn't there to argue. I was there to show her something she deserved to see. She looked at the papers. She picked up the utility receipts and read them slowly. Then she set them down. I waited. She was quiet for so long I thought she might be processing it. Then she looked up at me and said, "Did you make these?" I stared at her. "Mom, those are real receipts. From the bank. You can verify them." She shook her head slowly. "I think you're very hurt, and I think you'd do a lot to make us believe you." She stood up and walked back to her car. I sat on that bench alone for 20 minutes before I could make myself move. I drove back to Ava's apartment and sat in the parking lot without going in. I didn't know what I was feeling. It wasn't quite sadness. It was something colder than that. The kind of feeling that settles in when you realize you've been hoping for something that was never available. I had hoped my mother would look at the evidence and crack. Even a little. She hadn't. She had looked at proof of my innocence and decided it was proof of my guilt. I didn't know where to go from there. Then my phone rang. It was Aunt Fola. I almost didn't answer. I was done being surprised by things that hurt, but something made me pick up. Her voice was quiet. She asked if I had somewhere to be that evening. I said no. She said, "I've been thinking about the meeting at your parents' house. Something hasn't felt right to me since that night." I didn't say anything. She continued, "The engagement dinner is in 2 weeks. Your parents don't know I'm calling you. I want you to come." My first response was to refuse. The last family event had destroyed me. But Aunt Fola's voice wasn't performing anything. It was the voice of someone who had been sitting with something uncomfortable and had finally decided to act. I asked her why she wanted me there. She said, "Because the truth should be in the room." I spent the next 2 weeks getting ready. Not the way I used to get ready for family events, with a nice dress and a covered dish, and the hope that things would feel normal. I got ready the way I imagined people get ready when they know something is coming and they want to be certain they are not the one caught off guard. I went through everything I had collected and organized it into a clear order. The utility payment receipts came first. Then the bank transfers between my account and Brianna's, printed with timestamps. Then the messages where she had begged me for money and asked me not to tell her parents. Then the credit card statement showing the secret account. Then the hotel bookings and the designer purchases, all dated and matched to the same periods when money had gone missing from the family accounts. Finally, I saved Mason's recording to my phone with the volume tested so it would be audible in a room. I didn't organize this out of anger.
I want to be clear about that.
I organized it because I had already tried pleading. I had already tried explaining. I had tried showing my mother a small piece of the picture, and she had called it forgery. The only thing I hadn't tried was putting all of it in one room at one time in front of people who didn't yet know what to think. I was going to do it once, quietly, and then I was done defending myself. 4 days before the engagement dinner, Brianna called me. I was in the middle of folding laundry at Ava's apartment when the call came. I answered.
I don't know why.
Maybe I was curious. She didn't say hello. She launched straight in with a tone that was wrapped in anger, but was actually fear. I heard you've been going around asking questions. She said it fast, like she'd been rehearsing it but ran out of patience before she could slow down. You need to let this go, Naomi. You're only making things worse for yourself. I was quiet for a moment. I thought about everything in that folder sitting on Ava's kitchen counter. I thought about Mason's recording. I thought about my mother walking away from that park bench. I thought about the group chat notification disappearing from my phone. Then I said the only thing I had planned to say if this moment arrived. See you at dinner. There was silence on the other end, long enough that I thought the call might have dropped. Then Brianna said, very quietly, what does that mean? I hung up. Ava looked at me from across the room. She had heard enough of the call to understand. She nodded slowly and went back to what she was doing. I set my phone face down on the table and finished folding the laundry. My hands were completely steady. The engagement dinner was held at a restaurant my parents had reserved for the occasion. Private dining room in the back, long table, white tablecloths. When I arrived, the room was already full and glowing. Candles on the table. A playlist of soft music in the background. Mom had dressed up. Dad was smiling in the way he did when he was proud of something. Extended family I hadn't seen in months filled the chairs. Brianna stood near the head of the table in a cream dress with Mason beside her. She was radiant in the practiced way she had always been radiant. Her laugh was a little louder than usual. Her hand kept finding Mason's arm. When I walked through the door, the room shifted the way rooms do when something unexpected walks in. Brianna saw me first. Her smile didn't disappear, but it went still, frozen in place like a photograph. My mother turned and her expression moved through surprise and then something harder. My father looked confused. I had not told them I was coming. Only Aunt Fola knew. She was seated near the middle of the table, and when I met her eyes, she gave me the smallest nod. I walked in calmly. I found a chair. I sat down. A few relatives nodded at me awkwardly. Most people just kept talking after a few seconds because no one knew what else to do. The dinner began. I let the first hour pass without doing anything. I listened to the toasts. I watched relatives pass bread and refill glasses. I watched Brianna tell a story about how Mason proposed and saw the way she performed each detail for the room. I ate a little. I kept my folder on the chair beside me. Then Brianna made her move first. She couldn't help herself. Around the time dessert menus were being handed out, she looked down the table at me with a soft smile that contained absolutely no warmth. I'm glad you came, Naomi, she said, clearly enough for the table to hear. Even after everything, I want you to be part of this. The room went quiet in the specific way that happens when people sense an edge underneath polite words. I looked at her. I didn't match her smile. I said clearly and without raising my voice, I have something I'd like to share with the table. I think it's important that everyone here has the full picture. I reached into my folder and placed the first printed sheet on the table. I slid it toward the center, where people could see it. Would you like to explain these transfers, Brianna? The room went so still you could hear the music from the main dining area bleeding through the wall. Brianna's smile didn't move, but the color behind it did. I went through it piece by piece. I didn't rush. I didn't raise my voice. I placed each document down the way you lay cards on a table when you already know what you're holding. The utility receipts first. I explained quietly that I had been paying my parents' household bills for 2 years out of my own account without telling anyone. I showed the timestamps. I showed the payment amounts. My father leaned forward. My mother's expression changed. Then I laid out the bank transfers. The money that had moved from my account to Brianna's over 30 months, small at first, then larger, each time framed as a temporary emergency. The messages she had sent asking me not to tell her parents. Then the hotel bookings. The designer purchases. The secret credit card. I could see the table processing it in real time. Relatives looking at the papers. Looking at Brianna. Then I picked up my phone and pressed play on Mason's recording. My sister's voice came through the speaker. Calm, quiet, calculated. Naomi can survive it. She always does. She has a job and no one who depends on her. It'll fall on her and she'll figure it out. The room was completely silent when it ended. Brianna's face had drained of color. She looked at Mason with something close to desperation.
He looked at the table.
She looked back at the room. Then she started talking fast, pointing at relatives, saying it was edited, that I had twisted everything, that Mason was confused. Nobody moved to agree with her. Not one person. My mother started crying quietly. It wasn't the loud, performed kind of crying I had seen from Brianna. It was the kind that happens when something true arrives and there's no way around it anymore. My father sat very still with both hands flat on the table. He looked physically ill. Not dramatically. Just pale and very quiet, the way people look when they realize they have done something serious and can't undo it. Aunt Fola reached across and touched my mother's hand. The relatives were not talking to each other anymore. The room had divided itself into silence. After a while, my mother looked at me. Her eyes were wet. She said, "Why didn't you tell us about the bills? All of it. Why didn't you say?" I looked at her for a long moment before I answered. I had thought about this question many times on Ava's couch in the dark. I knew exactly what I wanted to say, because I thought one day you would choose me without needing proof. Nobody spoke after that. Not for a long time. Brianna tried once more. She said my name, sharp and urgent. Nobody responded to her. Not even Mason. He was looking at the recording on my phone with his jaw tight. My father finally turned to look at Brianna. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. She stopped talking. 3 weeks after that dinner, the engagement was canceled. I heard it from Aunt Fola, not from my parents. Mason had made his decision. Brianna moved out of their shared apartment and back into my parents' house, which I was told was tense and quiet in a way it had never been before. My parents discovered the full damage slowly, the way you discover the extent of a flood after the water pulls back. It was worse than either of them had wanted to believe. Dad's business account needed months of careful management to recover. The emergency medical fund had to be rebuilt from the beginning. Brianna was cut off from family finances entirely. My parents called me. First a text from Mom, then a call from Dad. They wanted me to come home. They said they were sorry. They said they had been wrong. I believed them. That part one genuinely believed. But I didn't go back. Not because I wanted to punish them, but because I had learned something important about myself in the weeks on Ava's couch. I had spent years making myself easy to overlook. Paying quietly, giving quietly, existing quietly. I was done being quiet. I signed a lease on a 1-bedroom apartment across town. I was promoted at work the same month. I unpacked my things and put them exactly where I wanted them. The muddy family photograph I had picked up from the lawn stayed in a box in the closet. Not on the wall. That space was for something new.